Today I'm going to cover the pathway to the press handstand. Now, ideally, when we train the press handstand, we should be able to go through the full pathway from the top all the way to the bottom where our toes kiss the floor. Now obviously the goal is to go back up as well, but most people when they train the pathway, they'll come down and then they'll have a drop, or they'll have a section where they find it really hard to fill the gap. So they'll have a certain amount that's controlled and then the rest they'll fall. They'll spend no time under tension in that area. So what I want to do today is show you a couple of ideas on how we can fill that gap and make sure that we're training through the full range of motion. Now all of these methods aren't perfect because they're not the real thing. Ideally we want to be able to do the real thing, and that's where the eccentric comes in quite well, but the eccentric even isn't the real thing because it's the down. We want the up. So it's like 180 degrees out of phase in terms of the way the muscles work. So you're basically doing the opposite of the movement. So the first way we could look at it is, here I'm in my handstand. So I'm in my straight body position, then I'm going to go through the press. Now it could be a straddle, a tuck or a pike, but as I bring the legs up, now the butt comes off the floor and I roll through the spine and go all the way up until your toes touch the floor. So we're trying to get to that bit when I'm in that direction. It wants to look like this position. Now most people when they do this one, they'll find that the floor gets in the way, so the hip gets a bit clunky, and also their feet either don't go far enough, so we get to like here, or we go too far, which is unrealistic to what happens to the position. So one thing we could do to make this one a little bit more realistic in terms of range of motion is if I do it up against the wall, and I use the wall as the surface. So like my hands are on the floor here at the bottom of the press and I'm on tiptoes, I do exactly the same but up against the wall. So my hands are like on the floor like when I'm doing the work, and then when I come through, the goal is to get the tippy toes to touch the wall but leave as much as I can this way. What we don't want to do is be up here somewhere, because that's going to make the press really heavy and much harder work. I want to try and keep the hip behind, so closer to the floor as I take the feet towards the wall. So the downside of that one is my hips can't move because the floor's in the way and there's no balance component. Now the next one we're going to use a setup like this, so two boxes on an angle. Now this one is commonly used in gymnastics. So this is going to isolate the hip part of the movement, but not so much the shoulders. So I'm going to stick my head into the hole, I'm going to hold onto the boxes, and then I sweep through the movement, and then come back down again. So I'm just isolating that hip proportion. I'm isolating that hip portion of the movement, and I can try and focus on the rolling down of the spine. So the good thing here is that my hip can go back and forth and I can feel that balance point. When the legs come down, my hips need to go in the opposite direction to counterbalance. But the downside is my shoulders are out of action in terms of they can't move forwards and backwards like they do in the real press. Now obviously that one needs a little bit of setup and it's hard to do. You need to have two boxes the same height. That's where something like this yoga chair or yoga stool can come in, because I can do exactly the same movement through that pathway of the press. I can hold on to here for safety, but I can have something like this at home. So head goes in, try and get the hip up and over. So same as I do on the press, I can't press from here, I need to get the hip on top of the shoulders. So hip on top, then I can come through the straddle, back down, kiss the toes to the floor, hips go back to compensate the legs going forwards, or counterbalance. There I can do tuck, come down, I can do pike. Now, that is way more comfortable than the boxers, and I feel safer because I can hold on to here, can really let the hip go back and forth. If you are worried about those ones in terms of falling over, have it up against the wall, so you have the safety of the wall being there. When I come up, the wall's there if I need it. But you can really feel the hip going back and forth and allowing the spine to articulate and roll down. Now we can do a similar variation using the stool bars. So again, I'm going to isolate the torso this time, and it's going to be more about the hip movement. So trying to get the shoulders down, trying to get the hip on top of the shoulders, come up, back down again. Now this one's a little bit more restrictive because it's a little bit like the floor version where all of this is stopping my hips go back and forth. There's no real movement in the shoulders because the hands and shoulders are locked in position to hold me there. But you can really feel the hips opening and closing. Okay, then we have the wall versions. Now the wall versions can be done in different ways. I can have very little weight on the wall, so as I come down, butt just touches, low back, mid back, upper back, tippy toes. So I'm just barely touching the wall on the way down. This one's very, very good if you're close to the actual press, but just need a little bit of assistance with the targeting in terms of like telling your body where to go next. You can roll down the spine. If you need a little bit more assistance with it, you can do the more supported version where I lean everything against the wall. Just make sure the shoulders are strong here and then peel off the wall slowly. But definitely if you fall on that one, I'd recommend you use the yoga chair or the box one where you can get a full range of motion. And then we have the chest to wall version. Now this one again is very good for you if you're super close to the press, because as I come down, my hips need to go on top of my hands, slide down, trying to get my toes just to kiss the floor. But again, if you're more newer to the movement, you're gonna have that bit where you drop at the bottom. So you're gonna look a little bit more like this. So there's that bit at the bottom where there's not that much time under tension. So if you are working towards press handstand, assess your pathway. So from the handstand all the way down to the toes touching the floor, ideally the concentric as well, from the toes touching the floor all the way up to the handstand, in whichever variation you can do, and try and find the one where you have the least amount of drops or gaps or the area where you need to use momentum. We want to try and get that to a minimum and try and be able to spend good quality time under tension through the full range of the motion. Full range of the motion, full range of the movement.